with Jeremy Settles at the EPA, he said that the reason the EPA got involved in testing this site was actually due to media reports and not a council request. So I don't think that step was taken. I don't have confidence that it was. I don't think that based on the tests that were done, the single sample of soil that he took from underneath the clay cap showed that the dioxins are just as poisonous, some of the worst ones, as they were at when the site was last tested in the 1990s. And the Mayor previously stated that there was no objective evidence to state that the soil is still heavily contaminated enough to require an environmental audit. I ask you how you can still defend that comment when the single test of soil from the site shows that it is absolutely dioxin contaminated. I'll leave that there.
Thank you very much for your submission. Is there another objector who wishes to present? Please come forward.
Yeah, my name's Chris Sinko. I live at Lotham Street, Faulkner, for the last 10 years. And for all those reasons, I object to it. And also, there's not enough mention of the contamination in the surrounding area. That also needs serious testing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. Any further objectors who wish to present? Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Roger Pell. I'm principal at Faulkner Primary School. I represent not only our school but all the schools in Faulkner. There are 5 schools and 4 kindergartens. We have in excess of 2,500 children in the suburb of Faulkner. Our school is less than 500 metres from the site at 102 McBride Street, and there are other schools also within 1 kilometre, about 2,250 students within 1 kilometre. At our last school council meeting, we discussed this, and some of the councillors asked me to make a statement and to ask some questions, so I'll make that statement and ask some questions on behalf of our school council and the children. Our school council wanted to know whether the people who were elected to represent Faulkner are voting to represent the people and to say no to this proposal. They believe that people in Faulkner have been neglected for far too long, and it's time for the people who are elected to represent them actually represent them and say no to this proposal. There are some questions that came up. First one was, can each councillor guarantee that each child and that guarantee to each parent that the children are safe when they go to school? If this proceeds, are the children going to be safe? If we can't answer yes, then it doesn't go ahead. How do we explain to our school community if we have odours and smells coming across our school and other schools during the drilling and construction periods? What do we say to them? Oh, it's safe. There's nothing wrong with it. Another question, what do we say to our parents or say to our community if parents start to take their children out of our schools? They start to send them to Coburg, Glenroy, somewhere else apart from Faulkner because of what's happening in this construction. What do we say? How do we condone it? How do we explain to our community if we start to see children who have illnesses, cancers and leukaemias? Who do we point them to? You guys, to us? They're just some of the questions that our school council would like answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pell, for coming and making that submission on behalf of your community as well. I think there was a lady at the back who was coming up. Please come forward.
Hi, my name's Lana. I live in McBride Street. I moved there because it's a nice big block of land. It already had fruit trees. I keep chickens and bees there. I eat food from the ground there, and I just don't see that enough testing has been done, and I just don't want to see that site disrupted. I can't believe that the actual developers have any interest in Faulkner at all. I doubt very much whether they live there. Would they put their own children and family there on the day that they dig up that site and have all that soil blowing around? I don't see, if that soil is dug up and it contains all those contaminants, how it is actually possible that any of that community that live in that street or that surrounding areas could possibly be safe, because it's just so toxic. And this developer has been known to do illegal things before, so I don't see how we could actually trust him to adhere to any guidelines or anything that's put down there. So anyway, I would like to see it not developed at all, but maybe that's not possible. But there needs to be some very severe testing done, I think, before anything can actually take place there. I don't know how we'll monitor that.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. Is there another objector who wishes to come forward? Please come forward.
Patrick, I live at James Street, Fawkner. I agree with all the previous speakers and the points they've made. I wanted to raise concerns about the location of the sewage. So at the objectors and applicants meeting on the 29th, the representatives of the applicants were still unsure where the sewage would go. One of the possibilities was putting sewage through the verge. I find this quite alarming. I think a lot of other people do, given that the verge was a section of the property which was never remediated, was never put under the clay cap, and I would say likely contains contaminated soil. Given that there was nothing done to remediate it, I think it's a fairly critical part of the application, as digging up the trench for the sewage through the verge would likely, if it is contaminated, expose a lot of that contaminated soil, would disturb a lot of that contaminated soil. So we were previously told that the council was, or the planning department was following this up. I had a few questions, like who has actually been following this up, who have the council actually been seeking advice from on this issue. But I think more to the point, even with the amendments to the application, I think just having so many unknowns about such serious health concerns, like previous speakers have said, dioxins and furans are extremely toxic, and to have such gaping holes in the council's knowledge, our knowledge of what is actually under there, I don't think it's really acceptable to actually to grant this permit. And I think given the unique environmental and health risks that are posed by actually developing this site, I'd ask councillors intending to vote for this development to consider the message that it sends to the community. How could residents actually...
So just if I could ask you to please wind up, you're over 3 minutes.
Am I?
Yes.
Oh,
Am I? Is that the
What's
Sorry,
different?
2 minutes. Sorry, apologies. That says 3 and that says 2, so sorry about that.
That's right. I'm almost finished. How can residents and future residents of Fawkner actually have any confidence in the council if it isn't actually going to do its due diligence with our lives, with our family lives, with our health, with the environment? I think I strongly object and agree with what everyone else has said.
Thanks very much for coming along tonight and that presentation. Is there another objector who wishes to come forward next?
Right.
Yes, please come forward.
Hello, my name is Paolo. I live in McBride Street, and I am in support of the other objectors, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of this development. Modern City 2015 Mills guidelines state that the new businesses should not establish in Category 3 areas, transition to residential, while existing businesses are discouraged from expanding. The planning department recommends that the construction of 2 warehouses is not seen as a long-term business establishment, but as a small development. How is that possible? That, when it will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It includes 12 car spaces. It requires to modify the nature strip and the street itself. The construction methods and materials are not relevant to the intended use. A nearby business at 98 McBride Street has been operating since the 40s, I think, out of similar method warehouses. Does the planning department consider 80 years a short-term establishment? Also, the proposed construction will increase heavy truck traffic on our congested and noisy street. And we know that McBride Street has already a lot of problems with trucks. The council enforcement department has already major issues with nearby businesses. They don't have the manpower to enforce and police. And residents shouldn't be put in a position where they have to constantly complain to council. And we do already with other businesses. The urban planning also recommends the use of the land between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. Industrial use all day on Saturday and Sunday is not acceptable. It is impact the amenity of the adjoining residential area. None of the nearby industrial businesses, large or small, have a permit to operate on Sundays. I don't see why the planning department will even consider such a request with all the issues we already have with existing businesses. And this is my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Other objector wishes to come forward?
Yes,
Please come forward, John.
I'm John Englart. I live in Faulkner in Dowling Street. I concur with the other objectors so far. I think the precautionary principle is tantamount and should apply to this development. I am very concerned that there has been insufficient testing of the site, the verge and surrounding areas. The EPA have so far refused to answer my questions, which I have addressed directly to them, about what testing they have done. I am also concerned that the development will increase freight traffic in Faulkner. We are already seeing destruction of curbing and roundabouts by freight trucks through a residential area. This development will increase such traffic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Anybody else who wishes to come forward as an objector? Please come forward.
Hi, my name's Tash. I live in Percy Street in Faulkner. I'm one of the objectors as well and oppose the application for a whole range of reasons. Agree with what the other objectors have said. I guess we're curious about, what's the alternative if UPC consents to this with the amended conditions. Who's going to ensure that things are actually shut down on a windy day, or that things are actually shut down when odours get too bad? And our strong feeling is that they will get too bad, and we really don't feel that there's any kind of sense of faith that we can have in that being exercised, effectively. So we're dealing with an applicant who has had previous breaches and is quite prepared to wear the cost of them rather than perhaps do things the right way around. There's no, information in that amended soil management plan around who will actually monitor some of those kinds of things. And I guess that leaves us all feeling pretty vulnerable in terms of any sense of kind of risk to the community. And not just danger, which I think has been used in this forum before as a sense of danger, is we want to be assured that the risk is well and truly minimised. I think the absence, and other, people have spoken to the absence of the verge being dealt with. So, that is just kind of like a gaping hole in how we can be assured, and given that that sits on council land as well, how that responsibility might be met by council which is a question mark for us. We've also got queries about the source pathway receptor model to test the risks posed by the development, and that being quite questionable, and that this really hasn't been adequately defended to the community in terms of saying this is the best way forward in terms of assessing, a highly contaminated site that has this sort of history. And I guess just that any kind of modelling that talks about exposure to dioxins tends to assume that the people that we're talking about are healthy to begin with. They tend to be an adult healthy male, so not a pregnant woman, as Kim has referred to, not children, not people with vulnerable health. I guess a lot of those sorts of exposure reports tend to rely on where there's been occupational exposure due to, people using sprays and so forth, or, kind of Vietnam as an example, not, a site where there's been a long-term history of manufacture and production of these kinds of chemicals. So I guess, there are just so many questions here. We really want to see actually rejection of the application so that all of these questions can be answered before any kind of disturbance of that site goes forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much for coming along on your presentation. Any further objectors wish to speak? I might just ask for a show of hands of the remaining objectors who wish to speak to this item. 1, 2, 3.
There's one outside as well.
Fantastic. So there's 3 on here. Please, once this submitter finishes, please feel free to come to the lectern.
Little girl at the back.
Yes. Excellent. 3.5. Excellent. Please go ahead.
If it's allowable, I'd like to just pose a question and then read a statement out from one of our group who couldn't be here tonight. My question is just one for you guys to have a think about, for the councillors to just think about
Sorry, can I get your name and just your
Sorry,
address?
Matilda,
Yeah.
and I live in Warwick Street in Fawkner. And my question is simply, would you accept this proposal in your street? Would you accept it 500 metres away from the school that your child goes to? And would you accept it, in Methven Park? Okay, so my statement then is from Magenta Simmons, who lives in, pretty sure, McBride Street. My name is Magenta Simmons. I have been a resident and ratepayer of Fawkner for the past 7 years. Firstly, I would like to say that I agree with the points that must have been raised so far, because we've been talking about them. Any decision as critical as this one must only be made when all of the pertinent information is available and has been considered. As the points made by objectors tonight highlight, this is clearly not the case. Critical pieces of information are missing. The Council itself voted unanimously to receive further information on this, and this is not eventuated. Any decision made tonight is an uninformed and premature one that does not follow the due diligence processes that residents should expect from their councillors. This decision is of huge historical importance for the potential environmental and public health impacts, and the considerable risks posed by breaching the clay cap are not nearly outweighed by the potential benefits of approving this application. There are critical gaps in the information. The claim that the soil underneath the clay cap poses only an odour risk and there is no other health risk can't actually be made on existing tests. They are completely inadequate to determine this fact, and so stating this is misleading the community. The tests that have been conducted to date are woefully inadequate, and there is a complete lack of transparency in making all of the results public and disclosing what criteria have been used to determine risk levels. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Matilda. Next one, please come forward.
Good evening. My name's Alf Brecci and I live at Percy Street, Fawkner. I like to get down to specifics. Basically, there's an article here from the Herald Sun newspaper back in the early 90s, and we're just not talking about a normal, everyday toxic site. The toxic levels that were found back in the early 90s in this site were 250 times world acceptable standards. That's 250 times. That's not your run-of-the-mill toxic site. It's not an old tip. There's serious toxicity in this site. That's what led this Greenpeace to say this is in the top 10 toxic sites of the world. It's a thing that we would not like to have at Fawkner. That's what's led to what's happened now. So what do we know about this site? It was tested in 1995. That were the actual tests done within the boundaries of this block, and it was still found to be toxic back in 1995 after that. That's why the clay cap was put in place. The clay cap ranges from 1 metre to 30 centimetres. And we know that they removed about 80 tonnes of soil from this site, but that was from 100 and 102. It wasn't all from 100. So serious work was done to try and decontaminate this, but it was still contaminated. When they tested it, they said, this is beyond our control, we need to put the clay cap in. So what do we know that's happened? Okay, we move forward to today, and we know the developer has done some testing on the soil, but his testing was only done to establish the integrity of the clay cap. From what I understand from his report to the council, he drilled 5 drill samples, 5. The drill samples were only to test the integrity of the cap. None of these drill samples were below 1 metre. Obviously, to test the thickness of the cap, you have to go beyond 1 metre. Now, the drill sensor at the end of this probe that was testing the toxicity is 17 millimetres wide. That's no thicker than my index finger. 5 drill holes is all they drilled. Seriously, 5 drill holes. Having gone beyond that to test the thickness of it, they found that the toxic levels in that soil that they inadvertently obviously take up were still at 1995 levels. That proves it hasn't gone away, guys. It's still there. It needs to be dealt with. I put a few questions to myself about the developer's application. The developer wants to drill 16 holes for foundations. Have these locations for the 16 holes been tested? No. They know exactly where they're going to drill these 16 holes. The developer wants to put a concrete slab on the site. The foundations for a concrete slab that's going to allow big trucks to go in are going to be deeper than 30 centimetres. Have they tested beneath where the clay cap is thicker than 30 centimetres? No. There will be sewerage on the site. It will be dug out to about 4 or 5 metres immediately within the site as well as outside the site. They know where that's going to be. Have they tested at 4 or 5 metres deep? No. Why haven't they tested?
So if I can
Look,
please
guys,
ask you to wind up.
I will
because-
finish up here. Look, I'm not saying no one can ever develop on this site. That's not the way to go forward, I agree. But the developer hasn't shown enough testing within the site. You know, if we're going to be simple, we need to test within this site. And that hasn't been done.
Thank you very much. We
That's all
appreciate
I've
your
got to say.
presentation. Thank you for that. And we've got the final presenter. There's a final presenter? Or there's one, sorry, two more. So there's two more people. There's one, two. Can I just have a show of hands again at the remaining? Okay, there's four now. Okay, that's the final four. So yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Fiona. I live on Marlborough Street, which is about 1 kilometre away from the site. I live there with my 2 children. I'm a single parent, and being involved in this has been quite difficult for me, bringing small children along at night. But I couldn't, with any good conscience, not contest this development because I really am fearful for our safety. I want to agree with the other objectors who've spoken tonight, and maybe just add a couple of extra points. I wanted to make the point that as a member of this local community, I have felt quite powerless around this question of environmental testing at the site. Clearly, environmental testing is really expensive. It's not something that we could commission someone to do or organise someone to do. And so I think we're really relying upon council to represent our interests in this matter. And I was relying on the EPA, and I feel really let down by the EPA in this matter. I think that they haven't rigorously protected our interests. And I think that, as other people have said, that, we were quite confused by the environmental auditor who spoke at the previous objectors meeting, that while he kept saying that he represented the citizens of Victoria, that's theoretically how our interests are being defended here, he was quite clear that he had only investigated the questions that he had been asked to investigate, and he was quite clear to us afterwards that there are a whole lot of other questions that should have been asked about the site and that which weren't. So who is protecting our interests, and also who's protecting the local environment? And I guess that's the second point I wanted to make, is that I walk often along the creek and we cycle along the creek, and I think you would all be aware how important the Merri Creek is to residents of Fawkner and of the rest of Moreland, and that it's coming back to life, and the amount of work that's being put into it, into rejuvenating the creek. And I just can't understand why you would risk putting more dioxins. There's clearly already a dioxin contamination in the sediment in the creek. That's known up in Sydney around Homebush Bay, where there was a similar dioxin contamination. They will not clear Sydney Harbour of the dioxin contamination from that site. That's known up there. It's a very difficult thing to do. That's probably already the case in the Merri Creek, but this potentially could add more to that and make it a less safe and clean local environment, and it's really precious to us, and I just don't know why you would take that risk. And just the final thing I wanted to say is maybe just to propose how I would hope that this issue would run out, that you guys will reject this application tonight, potentially back us in taking it to the state government as a legacy site. This is a really seriously contaminated site, and we don't want to live amongst any kind of development of it until we know that it's safe. And we understand that that's a really expensive thing to ensure, to figure out how to make it a safe site, to figure out how contaminated it is. And so what I would ask is that you reject this and then back us in taking it and forcing the state government to take this on as a contaminated legacy site.
Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you. Got three more. Mrs. Snowden, please come forward. There's two more after that.
Nice to see you could come back from your leave until the October 2nd, Mr. Priest. It's good that you're here tonight. I'd like to thank the Planning Department for supplying me with the Golder report, which they extracted from a previous auditor of this site. It is damning. I'm probably the only person in the room that's read every line of every report that's ever been produced on this site, and I've known about it since it was in operation. I think all of our views are well known. I support all my fellow residents and colleagues in this. You already know my views from countless emails, and they're going to continue. I would absolutely urge you 100% to completely kill this application dead. I will support you in VCAT. I will be there quoting chapter and verse all of the documentation which I have my head around. I know the legals of all of this because I've got a QC on side backing me up, looking at all of this. I will produce experts for you. I will pay for them to come to VCAT personally to defend the council against this proposal. This proposal hasn't got a chance in VCAT. No one in their right mind would grant a development application for this site. You've got an overlay over this whole area, including developing the area behind. You're going to run into this problem sooner or later. A piecemeal solution to one site here is going to really foul up your long-term plans. I've been speaking with the Department of Environment and Sustainability. I've emailed the council about that. They are wanting to clean up directly behind this property, 88. You see it when you bring up the thing, it's that fenced off area that's being dumped on. Not only are they keen to clean it up, they know it's going to cost a lot of money. This is state government, we're talking to state government. Not only are they going to clean it up, they're going to prosecute the dumpers. And one of the main dumpers is the owner, developer of 102 McBride Street. So you're going to some council's going to reward him on one hand, and he's going to be pinged like you wouldn't believe on the other. But he'll be out of there before that because he wants to just sell this property off. We know he wants to get out of there as quickly as possible. He wanted to make it useful for 7 chefs, 106. But we put a stop to that. They were going to move in there. That's why they wanted the 7-metre doorways for semi-trailers to come in there. They were going to offload all their stuff from there because they had so much trouble from the residents up further with all the trucks. So if you put this through, I'll have you in court and I'll have experts and it'll be very nasty. So please do the right thing. You can do the right thing and you will be supported. We will support you with as much information and support as we can possibly muster. Thank you.
For your submission. We've got 2 more people. We've got 2 final speakers. Would you come forward, please?
Hi, I'm Amelia. I live on Hood Crescent. I just wanted to say I share the concerns of all the previous speakers and also wanted to bring up that it's not just the residents of Fawkner, it's everyone that uses the Merri Creek Trail. If the Merri Creek and the trail is affected, it'll be residents from across Victoria, because I know a lot of people that use that trail. And also with Fawkner being like a closed off suburb, you're going to just increase the freight going through, and it's just, I don't think it's a very good idea.
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you very much. I think we've got one final speaker, one final objector. Yes, please come forward. Yes, you're the final speaker.
I wasn't expecting to speak tonight. Evening, councillors. I'm hearing all clean up, and I think we all agree with that, but I've seen there's no solution here. And one example I've seen is Industrial Park in Brunswick. In other words, sure, we're going to object, they're going to appeal, we're going to object, but I'm just throwing up that notion that if it can't ever be built on, I don't know if that sets a precedent, but places like Industrial Park, Brunswick, when I was overseas, that's not a good example in Madrid, but because it just can't sit there either. It's private land. We need to have some sort of solution. I think that may set a precedent if it can't be developed, because that's all.
Sorry, can I just state your name, Harvey. Sir? Harvey.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I think that's the end of the objector submission. So I'll now ask if there is a representative of the applicant here who wishes to speak. Is there a representative of the applicant? No, in that case, I will now move to councillors. Is there a councillor who wishes to move a motion? Councillor Bolton.
Resolution. So I'd like to move the following resolution. It's a resolution to reject a planning permit. So the resolution reads that council recommend to VCAT that a refusal to grant a planning permit number MPS 2016-906 be issued for the construction and use of the land for 2 warehouses in an environmental significance overlay at 102 McBride Street, Fawkner, subject to the following grounds of refusal. 1. The proposed use is contrary to clause 13.03-1, which is use of contaminated and potentially contaminated land of the Moreland Planning Scheme, as the site has not been adequately assessed and shown to be suitable for its intended future use and development. Particular concern is raised in relation to A, inadequate information on the potentially contaminated land, including contaminants below the cap to demonstrate there will be no adverse effects on the proposed warehouse uses. B, inadequate information on the potential emission of contaminated gas, dust and water from the land, which may cause adverse impacts on nearby low-density residential land and open parkland. C, inadequate information on the potential contamination of the verge in front of the site, given the need to excavate this area for installation of services. 2, the proposed operating hours, especially for weekend operation and operation after 6 p.m. weekdays, will have a detrimental impact on the amenity of nearby residents. If I have a second, I'll speak to it.
Thank you. Councillor Abood wishes to second that. So Councillor Bolton, you wish to speak to this item?
Yes, I would like to speak in support of rejecting this resolution. I have looked at the council officer's proposed alternative resolution, which recommends granting a permit with certain conditions attached. In my opinion, this is massively problematic. I think we need the information, the adequate testing of the site, and adequate audit before any decision to grant a permit can be made. As soon as a permit is granted, the residents lose their control over the space. We've already heard residents talk about the fact that the auditor said that he'd only been asked to investigate certain questions, certain aspects of the site, not all aspects of the site. So because the developer hires the auditor, the developer decides the scope of the audit. That is not good enough in terms of public interest and public safety. The testing that was done in 1995 is very poor. We can't rely on that for the safety of the site, especially as that testing was composite testing, which means that the low, it was averaged out across the site, so the tests which showed low toxicity were used to cancel out the tests which showed super high toxicity. That is not a safe method of testing the site. The clean fill that was used to clean up, dumped in the site, was never tested and can't be guaranteed not to be clean and not to have asbestos in it. The cap is inadequate and needs to be reinforced to today's standard. There's not enough information in the council officer's recommendation to satisfy residents that the removal of contaminated soil will be suitably supervised and all safety measures complied with. That's in contrast to the removal of asbestos, where there's very detailed guidelines about how to safely remove asbestos. I think this application has to be rejected. As residents have said, it's not just an ordinary contaminated site, not that really you should take any contaminated site lightly, but dioxin is a very special chemical. It's very rarely created through natural processes. It's a human-made chemical, and even the two constituent chemicals that make up dioxin are incredibly toxic and deadly, and workers who've sprayed those two chemicals in East Gippsland have suffered dire consequences, and there has been a scandal in East Gippsland about the health consequences for those workers. I think any testing and any audit requires community consultation on the scope of the audit and the scope of the testing. And I also notice in the council officer's recommendation, it talks about an audit, and things have obviously advanced in the sense that the officers are recommending a statutory audit, which is what the residents are calling for, but it doesn't call for new testing, new comprehensive testing. I think given the history of the site, we need this information before any permit can be granted. there are issues, as the last resident who spoke about, a long-term solution for the site, and not just this site, the toxic site beside it that made up the original factory site and the surrounding sites.
Councillor Bolton, if you can
But I
start
think
winding up, please.
we can't. I think council will be. I'll finish on this sentence. I think council will not be using the precautionary principle of putting the safe and health of and safety of residents first if it grants this permit.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Abood.
Yep, so I would like to speak to Brian, Roger, Sally and Jen, Matilda, Tash, Paolo, Verdiana, Alana, John, Magenta, everybody who lives in this neighbourhood. And I would like to draw attention to the campaign for my fellow councillors to the campaign that you have rallied. And I would like to acknowledge to you that I can't answer the questions that have been put to me addressing this application. I don't have any of the answers about anything, and everything that I read about Agent Orange and the chemicals that were combined to make Agent Orange, which happened at this site in Fawkner, I find utterly terrifying. I find the meetings that you hold utterly exhausting. I am challenged to read your emails. So there is absolutely not a single way, I hope in hell, that I'm going to sit here as an elected representative of the North East Ward of the Moreland City Council and have as my legacy that I said, sure, go for it, drill holes in that clay cap, don't worry about what's underneath, it'll be fine, they'll deal with it. It's just not going to happen. The reason I didn't accept Councillor Bolton's motion to get a whole lot of extra testing done is because I don't believe that the state or the country has the resources or technology to do the testing that needs to be done. I think that because we are just little people in this big wide world, we need to just leave it where it is and hope against hope that, New Farm haven't committed an environmental war crime on this little patch of land up in Fawkner. Will continue to work with Colleen Hartland at the state level because I think that part of the reason that I didn't want to take on testing at a council level is that apart from it not being done, I think that would put the state in a position where they might say, well, that's okay, they'll take care of it and we don't have to worry, which is a great concern of mine. I think the best that we can hope for with this piece of land, which yes, would be expensive to fix up and clean up, but if it just gets left there, it's not a valuable piece of land as it stands today. And I hope that what we can do, and Colleen is working in this space, is try and get it listed as a legacy site that is recognised as having been hideously contaminated back in the day before we knew better. And speaking to that, finally, I wonder, do we know better now? Because I suspect that we don't, and this is why I have great concerns about drilling any holes in that piece of clay that's sitting on top of God knows what underneath.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. There are councillors who wish to speak for or against for the refusal? For the refusal, yes. Go for it, Councillor.
So my name's Anna Olivia and I'm also a North East Ward councillor. Thank you to all the residents who've met with me as well and spoken for hours on the phone. It's also been an issue that I've spent a long time trying to get my head around. I don't have a science background and it's been quite difficult for me to understand. But what I do understand is that I don't have the answers to your questions either. I guess I'm going to just focus on one point for me, which was when the EPA did meet with us, they told us that they were only testing above the cap. They didn't know what was below the cap. What they believed to be below it, they believed to be of safe levels that would still produce odours. To me, that is already a problem because especially with what Roger's spoken about with the local school, I mean, I went to a local school that was struggling and I just know that as a social benefit and as someone who represents the community, that is of the utmost importance that we actually make sure that this area is viable, livable and enjoyable for our residents. But more importantly than that, looking at the evidence with the idea of the hotspots as well and with the stuff that we do know about this site and how it was cleaned up and also the history of New Farm, I actually have been reading a lot on everything I could find on this site and also about what the EPA says, and the fact that it only takes 0.7 picograms per kilogram of body weight for it to be deemed a safe site. I mean, this is families with new children and pregnant women in this area, and all we need is for one of these drilling spots to be more contaminated, for that air to be completely contaminated. And the thing is, they also say they can't really talk to the risks of air toxins. So there is so much unknown for us here, which is why it rings so many alarms. And the minute you say to someone, this site had dioxins, people are already freaking out across Victoria, let alone the people who live in this backyard. And someone asked before, you know, what would you do if you lived in this area or if this was your family? And that was the first thing that I thought about around this issue. And representing this community, you also think, if that was my child or if I was pregnant and living at this site, would I feel safe? And the answer is no, so I'm refusing this.
Thank you, Councillor Carly Hannan. Is there a speaker against the motion who wishes to speak next? No? Any further speakers for the motion? Yep, Councillor Tapanos.
I'll speak very briefly because I agree with the views shared by my fellow councillors. And I guess there's no point in talking about the specifics of the application if you don't talk about the safety element first. And it's incumbent on all levels of government. And the number one thing that all levels of government need to look at is the safety of the community. And in this case, judging by what we know and fearing what we don't know, you simply cannot make a decision to proceed with this application. I just don't see how any authority, Moreland, the EPA or VCAT can actually proceed. There is great fear, and I think that a lot of that is very justified because we just don't have the information. I think I'm going to leave it there because without that and holding the view that we need to protect the community as our first and foremost duty, I don't know how you can proceed with this, councillors. So I urge an abandonment as well. And I think that would send a very strong message to the developer, but also other levels of government about what ought to be done with this site.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Any further speakers for the motion? I would like to speak as well if there's no further speakers, and the mover might want to close as well. Happy to speak next then. I won't repeat what my fellow councillors have said, but just to say that I wholeheartedly support their reasons, the rationale and the work that's been done in the preparation of this refusal. I hear that this has been a really complex one and one that we've spent a lot of time deliberating on. Firstly, a big thank you to all the residents who've got really involved and engaged and played such a huge role in informing us in a number of areas where we didn't have information prior. So thank you very much for your energy. And I know it comes from a place of great worry about what's going to happen to your suburb and what's going to happen to the city. There has been a lot of work also been done by our officers, and I want to thank all our officers for the amount of work they've gone above and beyond to try and satisfy some of the questions that we've posed to them, that the community have posed to them, and really have done their best to be able to do that. We have to look at these things from a very rational perspective, look at the questions that are asked, look at the information that's required within the planning scheme. And our job here is, how do we apply the planning scheme to these types of decisions? But there are decisions that come to us from time to time that ask a lot more from us to put on a number of other hats, to use a number of other lenses to think about the legacy and think about risk and safety, which the planning scheme often isn't adequately equipped to address and test and satisfy the community. And I think this is one of the most complex applications that we've seen and falls into that category. So I want to thank the residents and thank the officers, and our preparation and support of the refusal is not about the work that you have put in. We really do appreciate that. We know you've tried. That being said, just my concluding statement is that there are a number of reasons, as councillors outlined, for the refusal being proposed and supported. And I've thought about this very deeply about, how would I feel with the decision I made on this? And there is just a, strong feeling at my core that question that was posed earlier in the night about, can you guarantee the safety of this site and the neighbouring residents and the community? And, I can't tell you that I can, and with that I can't support the application if I can't tell you. I know that we struggle with that, and it's very hard for anyone to guarantee future safety, but with the level of concern, with the level of risk before us, I think we have to do a lot more before we can come anywhere close to thinking about approving something like this. And I'm hopeful of the follow-up work that's going to be required to be able to address this site for the future as well. And we will continue with that work. So on that note, I'll conclude my statement. Does the mover want to close very briefly?
I do want to make one final comment. Two points that I didn't get to make earlier. I think in the early stages when council was discussing this application, the EPA said to the council quite authoritatively that the reason they tested behind the site was on the basis of this receptor pathway model, that testing behind the site would pick up any contamination. The problem is that model, that method of test, that model they're relying on, is questioned in the scientific community. It's not accepted by overwhelming majority, and the EPA has acknowledged that to one of the members of the campaign in Fawkner. So I think, often there can be things which are, different viewpoints in science, different models are chosen, but it is not necessarily an unchallenged model which can be used to assure people on such a toxic site as this. It sounds from the comments that people have made that this will be rejected, and I think that would be the right decision by council. I think in an issue like this, that's so important, I think council does need to stand with the residents and the community, because I don't want to see what has happened in the United States, what happened in Brisbane, where housing developments were built on top of toxic sites, and for residents many years later who moved into those houses. Now, this isn't talking about warehouses, but I'm worried about workers as well. But it is an area which is meant to be transitional to a residential area at some stage in the future. I don't want to see another group of residents in Fawkner, in Melbourne, in Australia, housed on top of a toxic site, and then decades later the chemicals come leaching out of the soil and people get sick and GPs can't work out what the cause of the illnesses are. That's what happened in Brisbane, in part of Logan City, where housing development put on top of a disused gold mine. So I don't want to see something like that happen here in Fawkner. So I certainly think council needs to support the residents through this whole process and then look for a long-term solution for the whole toxic area.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. So I'll now, on conclusion of the debate, put the motion before us, the refusal that Councillor Bolton has proposed, to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried unanimously.
Can I ask for that to be recorded as unanimous?
Yes. I'll now turn to the officer to outline the next steps.
Thank you. The Urban Planning Committee has resolved that its position before VCAT will be that a planning permit should not be issued for the proposed use and development. VCAT will now determine the matter in March next year. All parties who have objected to the application will receive paperwork from VCAT via the applicant, which provides them the opportunity to become party to that appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who's come to tonight to make a submission. I'm sorry, Mr. Snowden, we can't. We've got a really tight agenda. Thank you.
And the residents will be working with you on
Thank you, Mrs. Snowden. Thank you very much, and thanks for all your work. I'll just give everyone a minute to reorganise the gallery. We're moving on to the next report. We're now moving on to DD 8417, which is 9 Station Street, Coburg, and I'll turn to the officer, Narelle Jennings, to present the report.
Councillors, this is an application at 9 Station Street in Coburg for use of the land for a medical centre with reduced car parking requirements. So the subject site, sorry, that's not a very good aerial, it doesn't come through very clearly, but the subject site is in a neighbourhood residential zone and is also affected by the heritage overlay.
Sorry, just pause for 1 second. Councillor Bolton, can someone please ask Councillor Bolton to return to the chamber? We have got quorum issues if she's not in the chamber. And Councillor Tapanos, please resume the presentation. Councillor Bolton, sorry, Councillor Bolton, we have please proceed.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Up on the screen is some photos of the subject site submitted by the applicant and an aerial photograph of the subject site showing the existing dwelling. So the proposal involves reuse of the existing dwelling on the land for the medical centre. 2 practitioners are proposed. The garage at the rear of the site is proposed to be demolished. That shows the proposed layout of car parking at the rear of the site. Just showing up on the screen there the existing elevations in the top left, the proposed elevations. The main differences are a ramp to be constructed at the rear of the existing dwelling and a sliding gate to be provided off Jessie Street. In terms of public notice, 16 objections were received to this application from 8 different properties. The main issues raised relate to the existing car parking and traffic issues in the area, the impact on the amenity of the area. The key planning considerations for this application have been compliance with Council's local policy for discretionary uses and the reduction of car parking. It's recommended that a notice of decision issue for the application. The key conditions are that the use is limited to 1 practitioner and the hours of operation are weekday only.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask if there are any objectors who wish to speak. Please come forward.
Hi, my name's Scott Sharman. I live at number 11 Jessie Street. I spoke to Peter McConnell today and he's got a slide that he's going to put up for me. So, as you can see from the aerial shot there, Jessie Street is a narrow dead-end street which is zone residential and is currently shared by 7 commercial and or non-residential occupants, which I've highlighted there. We've got Regen, the property next door to Regen, number 22 is Gwyneth Williams' house. This is on the north side, so just the top of the picture there. And number 4 and number 6 as you move along, which are supported accommodation facilities. And down the bottom here we have John Faulkner Hospital. Number 19 next to that, which is owned by the hospital. We've got Ambulance Victoria on the side of the hospital. And then further down in the corner there, the yellow square is the proposed medical consulting rooms in number 9 Station Street. And as you can see from the photo, about 50% of the street, just under 50% of the street's taken up by non-residential residents there. And Jessie Street's zoned residential. It's not zoned either commercial or a medical precinct zone. Look, enough's enough, I reckon. In the past, commercial and non-residential properties have been allowed to gobble up Jessie Street by using the council's discretionary uses residential area policy that seeks to allow educational, recreational, religious, community and a limited range of non-other uses to serve the local community needs in appropriate locations. With 7 commercial and non-residential properties already operating out of Jessie Street, we've reached saturation point. And we've done enough for the local community. Properties in Jessie Street are slowly being picked off by medical facilities and the like. Station Street's also zoned residential. And I just had a look at the clause in the council's discretionary uses policy, and clause number 22.2 provides guidance on preferred locations for medical centres. The policy just suggests a site with frontage to a road zone or collector road and sets a requirement for car parking at the rear. In this case, neither Station Street or Jessie Streets are considered a road zone or a collector road, meaning that this aspect of the policy hasn't been met. Currently, there's no commercial properties in Station Street, and by approving the proposed medical consulting rooms, it'll set a precedent, and we're worried about the floodgates opening more in the area, not only Jessie Street. My family and I have lived in Jessie Street for the past 19 years, and in the last 10 years we've seen Ambulance Victoria relocated to Jessie Street. As I mentioned before, 19 Jessie Street purchased by John Faulkner Private Hospital, the construction of a 4-storey car park in Jessie Street, and an extension of the car park for regen as well. The proposed medical centre has a 38-metre frontage on Jessie Street. Sydney Road is around about 200 metres away, and that's zone commercial. Surely the proposed medical consulting rooms would be better suited to one of the many vacant shop fronts in a commercially zoned Sydney Road rather than a street that is residential. And it would be more in line with the policy framework of the local council as well. I appeal to the council to support the residents of Jessie Street and reject the application for the development of number 9 Station Street.
Thank you very much for coming along. Is there another objector who wishes to speak? Please come forward.
Sorry, could I just distribute? This is 2 traffic reports, one from the council itself and one from Hardno. It was commissioned by John Faulkner Hospital for the State Planning Tribunal. So that's what I've got my statistics from. My name's Jenny Bouquet. I've lived in Jessie Street for 5 years. And the first thing I have to say is to declare that I have no conflict of interest here. I'm a medical practitioner, but I have no pecuniary or professional conflict with this establishment of this medical centre. I work in North Fitzroy. I've worked there for the last 15 years. I have no plans to move, and I'm not in competition with the place on the corner. Okay. Look, the first thing I want to say is that there's been a great deal of effort by Moreland put into strategic planning for community growth and development, and I'm really concerned that what's happening around us appears to be and driven largely by the presence of John Faulkner as a medical facility, is commercialisation of residential areas by stealth, with the creation of a medical zone around the hospital by a multitude of small increments. If this is really the intent for the area by the council, then I think it needs to be overted, debated and subject to democratic scrutiny rather than be introduced by 1,000 small cuts and converting us to a medical zone. The really critical thing that I'm going to talk about today is the traffic, and I'm not going to go too much into detail about Jessie Street because you've probably been alerted to the fact that a lot of traffic along there is ambulance, trucks. The supply area for the hospital is at the end of Jessie Street. And as Scott said, we're about to get a 114 space car park, 4-storey at the end of the street, which will probably increase the traffic flow in Jessie Street by 200 to 300 movements a day. However, what I'm going to concentrate on, if you can look at the map, is the junction of Jessie Street with Station Street on the right-hand side of the map, and the 150-metre stretch which goes from Jessie Street down Station Street to Moreland Road, which is our entrance into the world, basically. So this is a diabolically busy 150-metre stretch. It's probably one of the busiest stretches of road for its size in Moreland, and it empties into the extraordinary traffic of Moreland Road. It's the link between a residential community and expanding hospitals, service utilities, an ambulance station, regen, and the rest of the world. It's a bottleneck, it's a black spot for risk where separate, complex, overlapping traffic systems converge, and it's a daily obstacle for us already. The risks of building up any further commercial stuff in Jessie Street or along Station are absolute overload on that stretch of road and round into the corner. So what are the stats? And I've given you some stats there, but in summary, Station Street, according to the council traffic analysis, was at capacity carriage rate for its size in 2014. It had 2,805 movements along it every day, which is the maximum allowable for a street its size. It averages 200 movements per hour through the bottleneck between Station and Moreland Road at peak times. Station Street along that 150-metre stretch is routinely parked out on both sides of the road, which reduces it effectively to one lane only for SUVs, trucks and minivans. The car queuing at the corner
Sorry,
to try...
Can I just notice the time, so if you could please wind up, you're over your 3 minutes.
Well, okay. There's routinely a queue of 8 cars at the corner. Gridlock is common. You often get trucks nose to nose with the drivers in the road debating about who's going to back up first. Around that corner in peak hour, sorry, I'll cut to the chase. You've got 250 movements around that corner in peak hour, and at the same time, Moreland Road has got movements of 1,300 per hour along it. And just around the corner there at peak times, It's got a railway boom that goes down every 5 minutes, a tram every 8 minutes, a bus every 10 minutes, 3 sets of traffic lights, and the intersection of the upfield bike track and bidirectional bike paths on Sydney Road. And it's huge pedestrian traffic because the railway...
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to please wind up.
Okay, all right. It's diabolically busy, and every commercial enterprise that's developed on Jessie Street is going to add to this. It's unsafe, and I'm urging the council to try and contain the traffic explosion that we've been subjected to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there another objector who wishes to speak? No? Is there a representative of the applicant here? Okay, I'll now turn over to councillors. Is there a motion that a councillor wishes to move?
I'd like to move a rejection.
Okay, councillor Bolton, I'd like to move a rejection. Do you want to outline your rejection? Oh, she's to read it out first. She's to outline the motion first. Read the motion.
Okay. So the rejection motion that a refusal to grant a planning permit number MPS 2017-142 be issued for use and development of the land for a medical centre with reduced car parking requirements at 9 Station Street, Coburg on the following grounds. 1, the proposal does not provide sufficient on-site car parking to comply with the requirements of clause 52.06 of the Moreland Planning Scheme. This results in the proposed use failing to A, ensure that residential amenity is protected from changes to traffic conditions in local streets, including an increase in car parking demand, contrary to clause 22.02-3 of the Moreland Planning Scheme. B, minimise the impact of fewer car parking spaces on the amenity of the surrounding residential area, which already experiences a high demand for on-street car parking, contrary to clause 52.06-7 of the Moreland Planning Scheme. 2, the proposal will result in an increase in traffic congestion in the immediate streets.
Thank you, councillor Bolton. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Carly Hannon.
Yes.
Councillor Bolton, please speak to it.
You know, on the face of it, if you didn't really know about the surrounds of this application, you might think that this is just a fairly small proposal for a business, medical business, and fairly quiet practice, and won't have much impact on the surroundings. And maybe if it was in a different kind of street, I think I would be probably quite happy to vote for a proposal like this. But I feel, you know, on a number of grounds, like knowing that there is this massive car park being built at the end of Jessie Street, the fact that there's a lot of truck movements, it's not just car movements in the street, you know, ambulances and so forth. And so I am very persuaded by the arguments of objectors about the traffic situation, the potential disaster that could come from an increase in that traffic. So I feel that maybe some other areas could probably cope with the increase in traffic from this particular development, but I don't feel this street and the surrounding streets can. I'm also worried. I mean, I'm not sure if I don't think there's power within this planning application to do something about this, but I am also worried about, you know, at what point do we say there have been enough commercial developments within a particular residential street before it starts to become like a commercial street. I mean, I've probably got some more questions I need to ask about that issue, and thank some of the objectors for raising that with me. There was one other point I was going to raise as well. But I just, and I gather that currently the situation is that when there's change of shift at the hospital, that there aren't enough car parks for the workers in the hospital. And so that's also creating an incredible traffic nightmare, potentially risky situation in the area from, you know, total gridlock and people getting angry with each other and parking people in so people can't go to work, etc. All of those sort of things that happen. I mean, I'm aware of parking problems around that whole hospital complex, but I think Jessie Street probably cops more of it because it's the, where the delivery trucks go, etc. So I'm persuaded by those arguments.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Carly Hannon, do you wish to speak to your second?
Yes, so I'm supporting Councillor Bolton's motion, really because I don't have overall an issue with, one medical practitioner moving into a residential area, such as a psychiatrist in particular, if it's working privately. But I think for this centre that it's really just that there's now too many medical centres for an area that's deemed residential, and that as a councillor I don't feel really comfortable creating a situation where we're ultimately pushing residents out where it's not actually been a decision of a planning scheme or something for future planning, but just, by every applicant that comes through us making that decision.
Thank you, Councillor Carly Hannon. Councillor Riley?
Yes, I'm just standing to oppose the amendment, but foreshadow the the officer's recommendation. Look, I hear the arguments that are being put and thank the residents for putting those. I think the officer recommendation is actually very measured, and it is only allowing one practitioner to work there on a day, so it would average to have potentially eight people attending this, or 8 clients, and obviously the staff and so on, and the reduction of 1 car parking when there'll be 4 provided, I think is quite within the limits. This is not ideal, but I do believe the planning outcomes are about getting acceptable ones. I hear the arguments about what's happening along this street, and that's clearly something that we do need to look at. We can't decide this application on the foreshadowed or the proposal for a new car park at the end of the street. I'm somebody who advocates on many alternative forms of transport. This is very well located to all public transport, bike, pedestrian and everything else, and I would encourage people that I think we should encourage all the staff at the hospital to be using those forms of transport rather than putting in more car parks myself, and that'll be another issue we'll have to turn to later. So I'll refrain from going on to that application, but actually to talk about this one, in that I think this is a very small incremental change. But I hear what the residents are saying in Jessie Street about what is happening along there, and I can see that is demonstrated. That doesn't mean to say that our communities are made up of many elements, and even in a low residential or neighbourhood residential site, you can get mixed uses, and I think our communities need to be made up of mixed use. But I do see that the hospital is having a huge impact on what's happening in this street. So I think the foreshadowed, or the officer's recommendation is one that actually allows for a very small business to take this site up, and I think that it is an acceptable outcome, so I'll be not supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Any further speakers to this item? Any further speakers? I might close the debate then, in just also supporting what Councillor Riley has said. I appreciate what's been said in terms of the objectives, and thank you for bringing that and for the work that you've done to prepare this. And I totally appreciate that. We are concerned too in terms of the cumulative impact. The difficult decision that we have to make here is this site and this application contributing, and what level is it contributing to that cumulative impact? So a lot of the impact that you were saying that you're experiencing looks like it's been contributed to some of the bigger sites, and we've got to actually deal with that and make sure, and with the John Faulkner Hospital, we have been quite vocal in terms of our worry about the expansion and the impact it's going to have on the local neighbouring community as well. So we've got a number of sites that contributing to the cumulative problem, but we are still required to think about, is this site going to be, is it the straw that breaks the camel's back? What kind of impact will it have? And I think the amended, essentially what we've got before us in terms of the officer report is an amended version of what was originally proposed, and very measured and very limited, with one practitioner, I believe it's a psychiatrist. We want to encourage those mental health services and those co-located services in those precincts. But I appreciate that we need to look at the precinct in terms of what's happening with the precinct, because, as you say, it's moving into this other form, and is it moving so far away from residential that we've got to have a proper look at it. So we undertake to take on that work, and I just want to say thank you. It's a tough decision, but I believe that given it's only one practitioner, I'm hopeful it won't have the impact that we're concerned about, which is actually being generated by the other sites. So that's why I'm going to not support the refusal, and there's a foreshadowed motion for the officer recommendation. Any further speakers to this item? You wish to close?
I can close the debate.
Okay, yes, please go forward, Councillor Bolton. And
I'd just like to maybe respond to a couple of points. I think in looking at a situation like this and granting this application, I think councillors have to consider risk. So the car park at the end of the street is being built, like it's approved, it's not a potential plan of the future, so we know, council knows it's going to happen. So that is going to result in, I imagine, several hundred more traffic movements a day. People do use public transport in the area, but people often don't live near public transport, so that some people drive to the station to park at the station. So, I mean, that contributes to the problems. I think my understanding from talking to residents in the street is not so much the parking as the traffic movements is more of a key issue in the area. I mean, there are parking issues, but the dangers really result from the number of usages of Jessie Street in terms of trucks and ambulances and as well as cars, and that of course is going to increase exponentially with the car park at the end of the street. So I think we can't really make a decision on something like this without considering, what we've, the environment we're putting a business into. So as I say, if it was in a different location, I would probably vote in favour of this. I would think it was a measured response, but I'm looking at the dynamics in the street, and that's why I'm arguing supporting rejection.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I'll put Councillor Bolton's motion to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that lost. We have a foreshadowed motion from Councillor Riley, which is officer recommendation. And I'll just ask for a seconder. We can take that as read, I believe, given its outline. Councillor Aboud. And councillors, this is the complete opposite motion that we've just debated, so I presume that we won't need to have extensive debate, so we don't need to repeat any of the arguments because it's the complete opposite. Councillor Riley, do you want to say something briefly? Yes.
Essentially that I don't need to make a very strong case. I just want to reiterate that I think the problems are already existing at the moment, and I agree that we need to be looking at those. And the issues in Station Street are quite different in terms of what I think the impact that this proposal is going to have. I think the way that officers have tried to address the issue by restricting the number of practitioners during the day, which is to 1 rather than 2, which I think was which is what's been proposed by the proponent. This is a measured response, and I think the difference to the area is going to be quite, small in impact. But I do believe we do need to address the bigger issues in Jessie Street in terms of traffic flows by vehicular traffic particularly, although I hear there's some concerns around bikes and pedestrians. I'm not sure what they are, but I'd like to know more about that. And I support this application because I think it's quite measured.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. On that note, I might put the motion to the vote, given that we've exhausted the debate, if the councillors are agreeable. So I'll put Councillor Riley's motion to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried. And I'll turn to the officer to outline the next steps.
The Urban Planning Committee has resolved to support the application. A notice of decision to grant a planning permit will be issued to the applicant and all objectors. Objectors have 21 days in which to appeal the decision, and the applicant has 60 days in which to lodge an appeal against any conditions in the approval.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to our next item. Thanks everyone for coming along with that item. We're now moving to DED 8517, 8 Ballarat Street, Brunswick, and I'll turn to the officer, Aaron, to present the officer report, to present the application.
Thank you, councillors. So this is an application for an 8-storey building over 2 levels of basement car parking, containing 147 apartments. There's an aerial photograph up on the screen showing the location of the subject site on the corner of Ballarat Street and Oven Street. The site's in a commercial 1 zone and is covered by a design development overlay schedule 18 and also an environmental audit overlay. photograph of the subject site as viewed from Ballarat Street. And that's a photo of the subject site as viewed from Oven Street. Going to the proposal, there's the basement that contains approximately 158 car spaces spread over 2 levels of basement. And the general layout of the building is shown on the screen there. That's the ground floor plan. It features a large courtyard which most of the apartments face inwards. There's also a cafe proposed on the corner of Ballarat Street and Oven Street. Vehicle access is via Oven Street, located at the north corner here. As we move up, there's apartments of 1, 2 and 3 bedrooms that are located facing the courtyard or facing the streets. And as we move up, the floor plan stays relatively the same, but then pulls back as we go above the street wall, and the higher levels pulls back even further. That's an elevation of the proposal as viewed from Oven Street, and the proposal as viewed from Ballarat Street. The application was advertised and 13 objections were received from 8 properties. The key issues were bulk, shadow and daylight reduction to residential properties opposite the street. There were traffic and parking concerns. There was a planning information and discussion meeting held on the 18th of July, and there was one objector that attended that meeting. Following that meeting, informal amended plans were submitted, and there's some 3D depictions of the amended plans that have been put forward. They show a reduction in the upper level footprint, some improved daylight to some of the bedrooms and extra bicycle spaces. There's some more 3D images of the informal amended plans as viewed from Oven Street, and then a view from Ballarat Street close to the railway line, which shows the overall height. There is a 17 metre preferred maximum height in the design development overlay, and this proposal is for 25.3 metres, so it exceeds that by approximately 2 and a bit stories. And that is one of the key considerations with this application, which is outlined in the officer's report. And that is, the officer's recommendation is to grant a planning permit. The key conditions relating to increasing the setback beyond the street wall to 5 metres and maintaining the 1-to-1 building height to street width ratio, which is the objective of the design development overlay. And lastly, the key condition recommended is that the upper levels, 75% of the upper levels, or 3 of the 4 levels, adopt the same setback to avoid what we call the wedding cake effect.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any objectors who wish to present to this? No? Is there a representative of the applicant here? Yeah, please come forward.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight in relation to this matter. My name is Marjorie Kennedy from SJB Planning, and we're the planning consultants for this application. The application before you tonight is the realisation of the extensive work that the City of Moreland has undergone in order to transform not only the Brunswick Activity Centre and the Sydney Road corridor, but also to implement the aims of the Moreland Industrial Land Strategy. And that seeks for this particular area to provide quality residential development and to contribute to housing supply. I'd like to thank the planning officers for their very thorough report, but also for the assistance of holding a consultation meeting to discuss the application with the councillor who attended and also with the objector who hopefully as a result of those discussions is why they have not attended tonight. Following that consultation meeting, there was a lot of discussion about this application and about the concerns that the officers had with this application. So we sought to provide a new set of plans which addressed those concerns. So we took that opportunity to see if we could get closer to what council wanted. And through that, the key changes which have already been discussed were really in relation to ensuring that it is a very recessive elements of the top levels and improving the daylight access as well, so improving the internal amenity to the apartments. The application before you tonight is a high-quality development that implements the Brunswick Activity Centre vision by providing a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings a residential frontage to both streets as sought by the DDO, but also providing a cafe on the corner, which will service the residents within the apartment building, but also within the street and broader area. A podium which widens the street, so our podium is actually slightly set back from, excuse me, from Ballarat Street, which then allows us to achieve a higher street wall. Achieving the 1-to-1 ratio of the upper floors, carefully designed upper floors, and I think that's really demonstrated in the images that were shown in the presentation, that we've got a very different architectural treatment to the podium of our building, and that's the part that your eye is drawn to, with some very recessive and at most times invisible upper floor levels that are in a different colour palette and a different design. We've got a very large north-facing central courtyard which exceeds the MAD-C requirements. High levels of internal amenity for balconies, again exceeding the MAD-C requirements. And we don't result in any off-site amenity impacts to existing residents, because there are some residents within the commercial zoned areas, but we have no overshadowing impact on them and no overlooking. We also provide 147 bicycles. That was another change through our amended plans, was to provide excuse me, an additional bicycles within the basement. So that's now a 1-to-1 ratio for residents. So councillors, for these reasons, we respectfully submit that you should adopt the recommendation of the council officers, and I would welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. So we might ask if councillors have any questions of the applicant at this stage. I might start with some, if that's okay, if nobody else wants to jump in it. A couple of questions. First one is, the height is quite in excess of our preferred height for this area. Can I ask why you proposed such a high building in a 17-metre story area?
Yeah. So it is a discretionary control within the DDO, and in the design objectives for the DDO, it talks about a sense of openness and spaciousness, and the way that that is achieved is through the sightline diagram, so the 45-degree sightline diagram. So you can see in our application plans that we achieve it's in the order of 10 to 11 metre setback of those top levels, so they're considerably set back, so that the aim of the height was to provide a sense of openness. It's a discretionary control, and if you have adequate setbacks, then you can achieve a greater height.
The other question I had was on the environmental sustainable design features, and notes, the officer report notes a couple of the features, which is, we compliment you on that. However, in terms of the quality of applications that we're seeing, with minimum 6-star ESD now starting to see across the board, we're trying to up the ante there. I'm just wondering whether you can speak to how that could be enhanced, because it feels like it's not actually up there with the really high quality applications that we're seeing, and wondering why you didn't shoot for an 8 or 10 star, given the significance of this site being the first to go in this precinct for the activity centre. We want to showcase this as the sort of future desired outcome. So why isn't it higher ESD?
Yeah, so the ESD report that we submitted, and we provided some additional best assessment as well in relation to daylight. We submitted that application. It was referred to council's ESD officers who were supportive of our ESD report. So it wasn't an issue that was raised through the application, and so we were satisfied that we had achieved an appropriate ESD outcome.
Any further questions from councillors? No, please be seated. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. I'll now turn to councillor. Is there a motion on the table for tonight? I'm happy to move a motion from the chair if people are happy with that. I'd like to move an alternative motion, which is, I'll just outline that. Sorry, apologies, it's just gone off my screen. Okay, and that is to recommend the approval subject to the following changes. Condition 1, the preamble, amend and now incorporate the content of former condition 1A. Condition 1A, replacement condition 1A to require level 4 and 5 with a minimum setback of 5 metres from the street wall on Ovens Street and Ballarat frontages. Balconies may be closed by a maximum of 2 metres. Condition 1B, replacement condition 1B to require the deletion of levels 6 and 7. And renumbering, deletion of former condition 1C and subsequent renumbering of remaining part of the condition. So essentially what I'm proposing is an amended form of the officer recommendation with the recommendation or the motion to delete 2 levels to get us into compliance with the height in this preferred height in this area. And if I have a seconder, I'm happy to speak to it. I think Councillor Tapanoff, so might have slightly beaten me to it. So there are a number of reasons why I'm proposing this. Firstly, the concerns that I have, as outlined through the questions, the height is just too excessive for this area. We are seeing the intensity of speculative development across this city, and while we understand that we're in a discretionary environment, that's not for want of our choosing. We've asked for a mandatory control environment to give some certainty, because we've thought about what impact does height in this area have on the cumulative impact, what does it have, what kind of impact it has for precedent, etc. So we've thought about this as a strategic package, and mandatory controls support the vision of the strategic package. So we are not supportive of the discretionary environment, but that's what we have, because it's what the Planning Minister demanded of us or imposed on us. So we're working with that environment. Even with the discretionary environment, for something to come so much higher than the preferred height, I feel is it's just not satisfactory to me, for a number of reasons. While at the 45-degree level, we might be able to not see the excessive parts of the building, we do see it from other parts of the municipality. And the planning scheme, unfortunately, is limited in some ways because it asks for this test to be satisfied, but I don't think the planning scheme is strong enough in the tests that it needs to ask, and we're dealing with the fallout of that. We've seen it in other precincts around the municipality. In the Anstey precinct just north of this, we've got really excessive heights, and precedent is used as the prime example for why subsequent buildings are approved way in excess of the height. And that, I think, is many people agree across the city, both decision makers and residents, that area is really in poor shape because of those precedents that are giving rise to a domino effect now. So I believe it needs to be amended, and we believe this condition, what gives approval, does bring it down to a more reasonable level. I believe the ESD should be higher. These are signature buildings, and we want to see them be exemplary examples of future development. I really want to talk about, I really appreciate the positive features of this building, and the open space component within the building is a really great feature. It's rare, and I really want to commend y'all for putting that in there. And I would have asked for a refusal on this application if that wasn't there. That for me allows for this, even with 2 levels deleted, you're still above the height limit, but given that feature, I believe it's supported because it's about half a level over, and we do want to provide some incentive for some exemplary work as well. So thank you for including that. We want to keep that in there, but we do want to see a slightly lower building, and thank you for the apartments as well, the layouts, the size of the apartments, more 3-bedroom apartments. We really appreciate that, and they're the features that I really want to support the application on. Councillor Tapanos, do you have something further?
I echo the same views. Firstly, to begin with some of the positives as well. It's a really well-designed building, so to commend the architects and the applicant on its design features. I also do think that a lot of work has actually gone into thinking about the amenity, particularly the internal amenity for future residents, and also how the pedestrian access into the site. So a lot of great design features, a lot of positives with this application. However, it is the first application in a new area, an area that's been rezoned effectively for greater density living. And I do think that in those circumstances, we ought to tread a little bit more cautiously, particularly around heights. Therefore, I'm supporting the alternative that's been proposed by our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ratnan. We do often see just north of this site what's happened in the Breeze Street Anstey precinct. And to some degree, many developments have sort of occurred there that we haven't been satisfied with, particularly around heights and densities. And we've lost a little bit of control over that area because of precedents set quite early in the piece. So I, for one, don't want to set a precedent in this precinct that enables other applications that would have significantly less good design features, if I can put it that way, on heights, and lose control of this area as well as it gets further developed. So I think we need to tread carefully, particularly with the first one, and stick into the height limits, albeit discretionary, is a good thing for council to be doing. Just a little bit on the open space. I think that is quite positive. I mean, my personal view would be that it would be great if it was flipped around and abutting sort of Oven Street, so more of the community can access it as opposed to being almost a private open space for the future residents. I think that would be a good community contribution and will integrate the site a little bit better as well. But that's just my personal view. Overall, I think that we're very close on this application, and I hope that the applicant can work with council officers and probably come up with a new application that meets the councillors' views and also the scheme, and we're able to tick this off at a future meeting very shortly.
Thank you, Councillor Kapanos. Councillor Riley wishes to speak, and further speakers, Councillor.
Yeah, I just want to concur with comments from Councillor Ratnam and Councillor Tapanos in terms of the precedent that's setting and the pressures that we have on our city. Just wanted to also highlight the fact that we are looking at better design guidelines for our city. We just had a strategic meeting last night where we invited planners and designers from across Moreland and Melbourne to actually try and help us get to better outcomes. And so in that regard, the ESD provisions in this are reasonable. The apartment sizes and much of the code for apartments has been met, and a lot of work's gone into that, and I appreciate the responses you've made and the work you put into it with council officers. But given the significance of this site in this location, it's really important that we get it as acceptable as possible. So I'd like to see that we reduce the height impacts in this area and the intensity that would bring in terms of the numbers of apartments and the people who will be living in here in the future. So for that reason, I'm supporting this proposal, the proposed amendment, and look forward to a better having to consider. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to consider this again at this committee with an amended position that we'll find more acceptable. So
Or they can build the 6-story building.
yeah, build in some more ESD provisions.
Further councillors, just Councillor Bood.
I want to commend the fact that the apartment sizes are a little bit bigger than the Madsy asks for, because I think that talks to the quality of living that will happen in those apartments, and I think it's something that's great to see, because we don't ever get applications where we're asking for 6 stories, the applicant says, nah, we'll just do 4. So I think it's really great that you're making these apartments a little bit bigger, because it will add value to what you're building. Also, the fact I wanted to draw attention to the fact that the corridors are receiving natural daylight and ventilation, which I think is super important as well in terms of livability, and the bike parking, and the fact that you're catching water. But what I'm looking forward to, and I don't know how long it will take, is when applications come across this table that all of them have solar, all of them have, new tech, and examples of that are in the city. So there's a lot of new stuff that actually talks to the ongoing livability of a property in terms of the financials, and we know that power and gas are becoming things that we're going to have to look to ourselves to provide that stuff. And I think as developers, builders need to take that on board. So I will keep banging on about it. And the final thing that I need to mention, which I'm also going to keep banging on about, is accessibility. I think that we really need to start seeing applications where we don't have scenarios where, we'll get the accessibility report to you as soon as we can. I think we need to feed that into the dialogue of the fact that people who are in wheelchairs or need, challenged with accessing, not just living in a place, but also visitability. I'm really looking forward to hopefully a great outcome with regard to the accessibility report attached to this application. I will be supporting the motion, because the amendment, because I think it's super important that we do try and bring the heights down a little bit. I still don't understand why areas of Melbourne got away with never having 8 and 10-story buildings in them. Carlton, where I grew up, is a good example of this, and I don't have any idea why, because not all of it's a heritage area or whatever. But I think that as long as we have a scenario where we can't, we are going to see increased development, and we know the population's growing, we need to kind of keep a bit of a lid on it. And I'd also like to commend the garden. I think it's a great feature in terms of adding value to this particular application. It's something that we're really grappling with, especially in the south end of the city, is that people just don't have enough open space. And it's one thing to get, a tub of money to put into trying to buy something, but if there's nothing to buy, then we can't actually provide that space, no matter how much money we have. So I'd just like to commend that aspect of the design as well.
Thank you, Councillor Bood. Any further speakers to this? No? Then I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of the motion? All those against? I declare that carried. Thank you, councillors. I'll turn to the officer to outline the next steps.
The Permanent Planning Committee has resolved to issue a notice that's issued to planning permit in accordance with the alternate resolution that's just been read out. All objective parties will receive a copy of that notice of decision granting the planning permit and the applicant, who will be given an opportunity to appeal that to the tribunal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming along tonight and staying, and your patience for staying till the end of the meeting. We're moving on to our final application, which is DD 8617 498 to 514 Bell Street and 33 Westgate Street, Pascoe Vale South. Turn to the officer, Peter Galante, to present the item. Please outline.
Thank you, Councillor Ratnam. This is an application to make amendments to an existing planning permit for a mixed-use development. It's located at 498 to 514 Bell Street and 33 Westgate Street in Pascoe Vale South. So the planning permit comprises of a 5-storey building to Bell Street and 2- and 3-storey buildings along the northern part of the site. So the site is a large parcel of land. It has frontages to Bell Street, York Street, Will Street and Westgate Street. And it's located partly within a commercial bud zone and partly within a residential growth zone. The amendment application was advertised and attracted 7 objections, with key issues raised being in relation to car parking, traffic, amenity impacts and concerns with the height. The amendments make a number of changes to the design and layout of the buildings, but in a very brief summary, the amendments result in a larger 5th-storey footprint with a 1.5 metre reduction in the overall height of the building, a total of 4 additional dwellings across the entire site, a lower statutory car parking reduction than what was previously approved, an improvement in internal amenity for future residents, an improved mix of commercial tenancies and activation to Bell Street, and the amendments don't result in any unreasonable off-site amenity impacts. For these reasons, it's recommended that the amendment be supported subject to conditions, and some of those conditions include modifications to the 5th storey to further reduce its visual impact, modifications to apartments to further improve internal amenity, modifications to improve the streetscape presentation. But overall, the proposed amendments are considered to result in an improvement upon what's currently permitted on the land.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any objectors here tonight who wish to speak? No? In that case, is there a representative of the applicant wanting to come? Please come forward.
Good evening, councillors. My name's Tim McBride Burgess. I'm a Director of Contour Town Planning. I will be brief. It's been a long night for all of us, particularly yourselves with the meeting before tonight. Thank you, obviously, for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to the officers for their assistance with this application. We support the recommendation, including the conditions that have been put forward tonight. Those conditions are conditions which had been discussed with us and had been acknowledged as accepted before tonight's meeting as well. This site has a history. It's a history where this is an amendment application, an application that was supported by officers back in 2011, supported by yourselves, or the UPC meeting then in April 2011, ultimately supported by VCAT in early 2012. For a range of reasons, it hasn't proceeded to date, and part of that's been to do with the clean-up process and the monitoring that's needed to have been done in order to resolve the environmental conditions on the site. But what that has provided us with in that intervening circumstance is an opportunity to review the proposal and better it. Times have changed since 2012. The expectations are higher on both apartment amenity and on design, and we have pushed our client to do better on this particular proposal. We think there's a greater expectation, but not only just in terms of the way that the planning scheme has changed and policies have changed and our professional expectations have changed, but the market's changed too. We're seeing a greater need or greater expectation for more family-style accommodation, and that's led to some of the changes that are before you tonight. We've deleted apartments and replaced them with townhouses in parts of the proposal. The northern part of the site, where it's in a residential zone, has gone from a smaller scale apartment building to 17 townhouses, 3-bedroom townhouses. And the apartments themselves have improved in quality as well, as you've heard Ms Galante say before. This is a proposal that seeks to just respond to those changes in expectations. We've got better apartments, we've got a greater mix of apartments, we've got a greater mix of uses on the site too. We've now got a smaller supermarket, but we've got medical, we've got a shop, we've got a cafe. Since it was previously approved, this is now a nominated activity centre, so we're providing a genuine mix of uses on the site to try and respond to that. We've also seen policy changes that have occurred where we've got a residential growth zone on part of the site and the adjoining properties, which wasn't the case when the previous application was considered, which arguably means that there's a greater opportunity there. But we haven't sought to do much and change the envelope that's been approved, with the exception of a slight extension of the 5th floor as it's closer to Bell Street. We've also done things like increase the common area. We've got 800 square metres, or 771 square metres of communal open space on the roof terrace, facing north. So pure, unencumbered northern access to an outdoor space for these residents to enjoy. Got 104 more bicycle spaces that we had in the previous application as well. The proposal is an improvement on any measure, and on that basis, we'd urge you, as the officers have recommended, to support the application.
Thank you very much. Before you sit down, I might just ask councillors if they have any questions of the applicant or representative. Councillor Wood.
Yep, and just in keeping with my comments of the last application,
Sure.
Yes, it is highly improved, but there is this one thing, which says that, pardon me, the amended application the original application provided 77% of visitable dwellings, 22% of adaptable dwellings, and 11% which were to be constructed as accessible. The amended application proposes 3 adaptable townhouses and 25 adaptable apartments, equating to 22% of the whole entire development. I just wondered if you could talk to that a little bit, maybe.
Yes, we have responded, as I said, to policy shifts. Whilst it is fewer DDA compliant or visitable apartments than the previous scheme, we've still sought to maintain what's expected by your planning scheme today. It's an offset. There's been other improvements across the broader aspects of the proposal, and that was one where we saw that a reduction in line with existing policy would still be, or should still be, acceptable on the broader balance of all the other improvements that are being introduced too.
Any further questions of the applicant?
Yes, can you just talk to your ESD outcomes, because I think we've given the last applicant quite a message, and I'd like to know a little bit more about it, because I can't sort of see that it's meeting the achieved best practice, but we're wanting to go higher than that, and personally I am.
The application was supported by an ESD report. It has been supported by the council officers. We didn't get any feedback to the contrary. It goes further than the previous proposal. What we've put forward is it does meet best practice in terms of BESS, and the apartments on average achieve a 6.5 star rating. So they're again in excess of expected or minimum 6 star rating that would be expected. So as I said, also we've got 104 more bicycle spaces than we had previously too.
Yep, Councillor
So
Riley.
can you just comment as to whether you're providing any renewable energy, and whether you're actually intending to put gas into this building?
I cannot say. I can't say that I'm familiar enough with, and I haven't reread the sustainability report since it was originally prepared in August 2016.
99 kilowatt photovoltaic system.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
system water as well. So yes, doesn't talk about gas though. No worries. It's a lot of detail to be across. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Fandi.
The site's quite derelict, so there's a lot of community asking when this site will be developed. It seemed like this has been going around in circles for a long time. I know you're not the developer, but what are the... Can we get a commitment that it's going to be...
The current approval was extended to April of next year. We wanted that to be obviously live whilst this application run, in the event that for whatever reason it wasn't supported. Hopefully with a positive recommendation tonight and an NOD issued and with no objectors here tonight, hopefully, and the fact that there's been discussions with the objectors during the course of this application, and we've had less than 10% of the number of objections to the previous application in 2011, that will mean that the permit issues and we can get going on things. The audit process takes time. There was a period of time, almost 12 months, where monitoring needed to occur, and sometimes that just occurs, but that's done now. So with the issue of a permit and then detailed design drawings done, there's nothing stopping this proposal going ahead, and certainly we've worked hard to put forward a proposal we think is better and will do better in the market, so that they can get cracking on the marketing as soon as the permit issues.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much for answering those, and please be seated. I'll now turn to councillors. Is there a motion before council? Councillor Abood.
Yes, I'd be happy to propose that we accept the recommendations that were put by the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. A seconder for that item? Yep, Councillor Riley. Councillor Abood, do you wish to say anything further?
Yeah, not too much more, but just that this is a scenario where it's been reworked a little bit, and I think that the outcomes are getting better, and I think that's commendable, and so I hope we see something that isn't the poor old broken SSW on that site, as soon as it can be achieved.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. Councillor Riley, any further comments on this item? No? In that case, perhaps just a closing remark, just to thank all the work that's gone into the revisions and the improvements. That's really fantastic to see, and echo the previous comments made by councillors. Those features are fantastic. Okay, we'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried. And I'll take the officer to outline the next steps.
Thank you, Councillor Ratnam. The Urban Planning Committee has determined to issue a notice of decision to grant an amended planning permit subject to the conditions contained within the recommendation. Once the notice of decision is issued, if objectors don't appeal within the 21 days, a planning permit will issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the officers and councillors in attendance and your patience for a long night. We've done 3 meetings tonight. That's probably a record. Thanks to everyone in the gallery, our viewers at home as well, for watching and being observing what's happening tonight, and for all the people who presented as well. Thanks, everyone. Good evening. We declare the meeting closed.